Most people see a homeless man standing outside a fence at night and keep walking. They see a nuisance. They see a problem. They see someone to move along. That's exactly what every rider inside the Ironclad Motorcycle Club's garage assumed the evening a stooped 75-year-old stranger stepped through their open bay door in a canvas coat 2 sizes too big. They were wrong. He didn't ask for change. He didn't ask for a meal. He nodded at the dead engine sitting up on the lift and asked if he could take a look at it. Then he asked the question that stopped every wrench in that garage cold. If I fix your bike, can you keep me? What the club's president said next would give a homeless man 48 hours to change the rest of his life. The Ironclad Clubhouse sat in a converted feed and seed warehouse just off Route 9 outside Pike Hollow, Indiana, 3 miles past the last working streetlight. The smell of gasoline and old cigarette smoke lived permanently in the concrete, layered under motor oil and the particular sweetness of brake cleaner. A single bay light hummed overhead, buzzing every few seconds like it was thinking about giving out. Rain tapped the corrugated roof in a rhythm nobody in the garage had bothered to notice anymore. A portrait of a member named Cole, who died on I-79 years back, hung above the workbench, and beneath it sat a jukebox nobody had gotten around to fixing since. Along the back wall, a row of plaques marked every toy run and veterans benefit the chapter had ever organized, going back to a year printed in numbers faded, almost past reading. This was the kind of place that had once been full past midnight on a Friday. Engines lined up 3 deep in the gravel lot outside. Most nights now, it held 4 men, a pot of burnt coffee, and whatever engine problem had refused to solve itself that week. Dutch Alvarez had run the Ironclad chapter for 15 years, and at 58 he still did most of the hard mechanical work himself rather than hand it off. Built low and solid, silver stubble, forearms scarred from 4 decades of engine work, he stood over the seized engine on the lift that night, the way a man stands over a problem he's already tried everything he knows. His own father had taught him to turn a wrench in a garage not unlike this one, in a small Ohio town, 200 miles east, back before the old man's heart gave out at a workbench, much like this workbench. Dutch still kept his father's timing light in a drawer he never opened for any other reason. He had a son of his own now, grown and living 2 states away, who called on holidays and not much else. And some nights, the distance between them sat on Dutch heavier than any engine ever had. He had tried, more than once, to say something to close that distance, and never found the words before the call ended. Right now, he wanted exactly one thing: to get this bike running before the Marion County Toy Run in 2 days. A run that raised the only money the chapter still put toward anything besides its own upkeep. And he was out of ideas. Before we get to what happened next, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. I read every single one of them. Now, back to that garage bay. Because the man standing in the doorway was about to change everything in it. His name was Walter Doss, and everyone in Pike Hollow used to know him as Walt, the man who'd run Doss Auto and cycle on Main Street for 41 years before the bank took the building. He was 75 now, his hand still steady despite the tremor that lived in the rest of him, still calloused in the exact places a lifetime of engine work calluses a man's hands. He'd married Loretta the year he opened the shop, and for 38 years she'd kept the books in the back office, while he kept every engine in 3 counties running, and between the 2 of them they'd never once needed anything more than what that shop provided. He kept her wedding ring on a shoestring around his neck, tucked under his shirt where the cold couldn't get at it. 3 years after the cancer took her, and took the last of the shop's savings with her in the same 18 months. He had sold his own truck to pay for one more round of treatment that didn't work. And after the bank auctioned the building 6 months after her funeral, Walt had nowhere left that was his. For the last 8 months, he had slept in a tent under the Route 9 overpass, a mile and a half from where he now stood, keeping a milk crate of hand tools organized by size the way he'd kept his shop organized for 4 decades. Wrench sizes ascending left to right exactly as Loretta had once teased him about. He still fixed the bicycle chains of the neighborhood kids who rode past his overpass, refusing every dollar they tried to press on him, because fixing something broken was the one thing in his life that still made sense to him when almost nothing else did. He had not asked another human being for help since the day the bank changed the locks on his shop. Not once. Not from pride so much as from a lifetime of being the one people came to, rather than the other way around. Tonight he'd walked the mile and a half in the rain because he'd heard 2 men talking outside the gas station about a bike the Ironclad Club couldn't get running. And something in him, some old reflex from 4 decades of solving exactly that problem, had made the decision before the rest of him caught up to it. He stood in the doorway, dripping, cold clear through, watching 4 bikers go still and wary at the sight of him. "Evening," he said. "That single you got up on the lift sounds like it's not just seized. Sounds like somebody already tried to force it before they brought it to you." Dutch straightened up slow. "And how would you know that?" Walt's hands, trembling faintly now that he'd stopped moving, found the edge of the doorframe. 41 years at Doss Auto and Cycle, before it was somebody else's building, he said. "Let me look at it. I don't want money. I want a dry place to sleep and something warm to eat. If I fix it and I'm still useful to you after, maybe you let me stay." Boone Whitlock, the club's youngest full member at 34, had been burned before by exactly this kind of offer. 2 winters back, a drifter had talked his way into 3 nights on the clubhouse couch and left with a socket set and a leather jacket that had belonged to Cole. Boone had been the one to notice both missing, and he had not forgotten the shame of having trusted a stranger that easily. "We don't know him," Boone said, low, to Dutch, not quite low enough. "Could be running the same play." Dutch looked at the old man a long moment, at the steady hands underneath the trimmer, at eyes that held his without flinching. 48 hours, Dutch said finally. "You get the cot in the back room, hot meals, and every tool in this shop. In 48 hours that engine either runs or it doesn't, and either way we'll know a good deal more about you than we do right now." Walt nodded once. "Fair enough," he said. "More than fair." The first day went quietly. Walt ate 2 full plates at the clubhouse table without being asked twice, slept 9 hours straight for the first time in 8 months, and spent the rest of his waking hours with his hands inside the seized engine, talking to it more than to anyone in the room, the way mechanics do when the machine is the only thing listening back. By the end of that first day, he had the block apart on the bench, had diagnosed a cracked case that 3 men before him had missed entirely, and had ordered a replacement part through a supplier he still remembered by name from 40 years of ordering parts through the same catalog. Boone watched him work without saying much, but he noticed that nothing on that bench went missing, that Walt cleaned every tool before setting it down exactly as he'd found it, and that the old man thanked Ruth, the clubhouse cook, by name every single time she refilled his coffee. The trial might have stayed simple if Russell Tate hadn't shown up on the second day. Tate had bought most of Doss Auto and Cycle's equipment for pennies at the bank auction 3 years before, including a torque wrench Walt had bought new in 1988 and had engraved with his own initials the week he bought it. Tate ran the scrapyard on the county line and had built a small local reputation on being the man who never let a debt or a grudge go unsettled. And there was history between the 2 men that went back further than the auction. 20 years earlier, Tate had tried and failed to buy Doss Auto and Cycle outright, and Walt had turned him down flat, telling him plainly that he didn't trust a man who valued a business only for what he could strip out of it and resell. Tate had not forgotten that refusal, and buying the shop's tools for nothing after the bank foreclosed had felt, to him, like a debt finally settled. He had heard, the way news moves fast in a town of 4,000 people, that his old rival's ruined husband was suddenly warm, fed, and welcome somewhere, and it had cost him a full day of stewing before he decided he couldn't let that stand. He drove out to the ironclad clubhouse that afternoon with the specific intention of making sure it didn't last. He found the torque wrench sitting on the workbench beside Walt's borrowed tools, the one piece Walt had kept hidden in his coat lining through 8 months under the overpass, because it was the last thing he owned that Loretta had ever bought him. A birthday gift the year the shop turned 10. "That's stolen property," Tate said, loud enough for the whole garage to hear, pointing at the wrench like evidence in a courtroom. "That come off my lot 2 weeks ago. I ought to call the sheriff right now and let him sort out what else this old man's helped himself to since he crawled out from under that overpass." The garage went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when everyone in it is deciding, fast, who to believe. Walt's hands had started shaking harder, not from the cold this time. "That wrench is mine," he said, his voice thin but not backing down. "Bought it new in 1988. My initials are stamped in the handle, WD, right under the grip. Loretta gave it to me the year the shop turned 10. Tate laughed, short and ugly. "Initials don't prove a thing an old man can't just as easily fake, and sob stories about a dead wife don't prove much either." Boone Whitlock's jaw tightened at that, and for the first time since Walt had walked through the door, Boone found himself wanting to defend the very man he'd been suspicious of a day earlier. 3 men in that garage had watched Walt work for a day and a half, without a single wasted motion, without so much as a tool going missing from the bench. 3 men said nothing at all, waiting to see which way Dutch would move. That was when Dutch Alvarez set down the wrench he'd been holding. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush across the garage. He walked over, unhurried, boots even on the concrete, and picked up the torque wrench, turning it over slowly until the stamped letters caught the bay light. "W.D." he read aloud. "Matches the initials on a business license I looked up an hour ago for Doss Auto and Cycle, filed 1979. 6 words might have done it, but Dutch gave him 12 instead, because he wanted Tate to hear every one. You bought his shop's inventory, not his whole life." Tate's face went the color of old rust. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he said, but the words had already lost their weight the moment they left his mouth. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Dutch said. "A man who bought a dead man's tools cheap and came out here to scare an old friend out of a warm bed. Get off my property." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody so much as reached for a rag to keep their hands busy, waiting to see whether Tate would push it further. He didn't. He backed toward his truck, muttering that this wasn't finished, that he'd have a sheriff's deputy out there by morning to sort out whose property was whose, and Dutch told him that suited him fine, because he'd already called Deputy Sam Griggs himself an hour earlier and asked him to swing by and settle the question properly. Tate's confidence, so loud a minute before, seemed to drain out of him somewhere between the workbench and his truck door. His truck spun gravel pulling out of the lot. Walt stood very still at the workbench, the wrench back in his own trembling hand, and said nothing for a long moment, because he didn't trust his voice yet. There was a second clock running that nobody but Walt had mentioned out loud. The city had posted a notice under the overpass 4 days earlier. The encampment would be cleared by a code enforcement crew at dawn on the same morning his 48 hours ran out. Everything he still owned in the world besides what sat on that workbench was in a tent a mile and a half away, waiting to be swept into a dump truck with the rest of what the town had decided not to look at anymore. He hadn't told Dutch about the notice, not wanting a second chance to look like a man fleeing one problem into another. But the thought of it sat cold in his chest every hour that passed. Engines. That was the sound that woke Boone Whitlock at 4 a.m. on the second night. A low building rumble rolling up Route 9 from 3 directions at once. Dutch had made calls of his own after Tate's truck cleared the lot. First to 2 prospects who owed him favors. Then to the presidents of 2 neighboring chapters in Marion County, who didn't need much explaining once they heard the words homeless veteran mechanic and 48 hours in the same sentence. 14 riders pulled into the ironclad lot before sunrise, engines cutting to silence one by one, and half of them went straight for the seized engine, while the other half loaded into 3 trucks and headed for the Route 9 overpass, with orders to bring back every last thing in that tent before the city crew arrived. A rider named Earl Higgins, who everyone called Torque for reasons nobody outside the club fully remembered, took one look at the engine Walt had been coaxing back to life for a day and a half and said only, "Show me where you left off." Walt showed him. A younger rider named Priya Nakamura, the newest full member of the Marion County chapter, spent 40 minutes on her knees in the mud under the overpass at 5 a.m, folding a dead man's. No, a very alive man, tent with more care than the job strictly required, because somebody had told her whose tent it was on the drive over, and it had changed how she handled it. By 6 that morning, with borrowed hands turning wrenches on either side of him, and his own milk crate of tools finally sitting safe in the corner of the garage instead of under a highway, Walt Doss got the engine to turn over. It caught rough, coughed twice, and then settled into a steady, even idle that made 3 grown bikers go quiet just to listen to it. Deputy Griggs arrived 20 minutes later, looked at the business license, the engraved initials, and Tate's own auction paperwork, and told Tate over the phone that there would be no charges filed, and that he'd best not come back out to the ironclad lot again. Tate didn't. The city crew arrived at the overpass at 7 to find an empty patch of gravel and nothing left to clear. Dutch Alvarez didn't make a speech. He set a set of keys to the back room and a spare cut with a small patch reading shopkeeper stitched fresh onto the shoulder down on the workbench next to Walt's wrench. 48 hours is up, he said. You're staying. 4 words followed by 4 more, and that was the whole of it. Walt Doss, who had spent 8 months believing no room anywhere, still had space for a man his age with nothing left to offer but calloused hands. Put his palm flat on the workbench to steady himself, and did not, for once, try to hide that his eyes had gone wet. Boone Whitlock was the one who carried Walt's milk crate of tools up to the back room that morning, and somewhere between the garage and the stairs he found himself apologizing for the suspicion he'd shown 2 days earlier. Walt told him there was nothing to apologize for, that a man who'd been burned once was right to be careful the second time, and the 2 of them have worked side by side in that garage most mornings since. Word of what happened at the Ironclad clubhouse made its way around Pike Hollow the way word does in a town that size, and within a month 3 separate families had brought their kids' bicycles out to Route 9 just so Walt could be the one to fix them, the same way he always had for free, except now from a proper workbench with a roof that didn't leak. That same week, for reasons he never fully explained to anyone in the chapter, Dutch Alvarez called his son for the first time in 11 months without waiting for a holiday to be the excuse. He didn't tell Walt that watching an old man get handed back a life he'd thought was over had anything to do with it. But he made the call from the same workbench, standing not far from where the wrench still sat, and the conversation ran 40 minutes longer than either of them expected. 2 days later, that same engine led the Marion County toy run down Route 9, with Walt riding in the sidecar Dutch had welded on special for the occasion. His milk crate of tools strapped safe behind him, and every rider who passed him on that stretch of highway later said the engine ran cleaner than it ever had in the 15 years the club had owned it. He has a room above the garage now, and a standing job keeping every bike in the Ironclad chapter running clean. And on Sundays, he still fixes the neighborhood kids' bicycle chains for free, in the same unhurried way he always has. Except now he does it with a roof over his head, and Loretta's ring warm against his chest instead of cold. The chapter has taken to calling him Shopkeeper, the way other clubs hand down a road name, and Walt answers to it now more readily than he answers to Walter. Walter Doss asked a room full of strangers if a fixed engine could buy him a place to stay. They didn't just keep him, they gave him a home. If you believe it's never too late for someone to be given a second chance, tell us where you're watching from tonight. I read every comment.